videos are also archived. The last 2 books, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, as well as The Radical King, which we're reading. These lessons are also being archived on our YouTube channel, which is Church Love 333. Again, that's Church Love 333. All right. So good morning, good morning, good morning. I hope that you are having a great and wonderful day. We are continuing our study, our reading of The Radical King. Again, we are reading certain sections from The Radical King. We are not reading through the whole book because some of the things he talks about in here we've already covered in his previous writings, and this is a book that's more so a compilation of MLK's sermons, of different speeches that he has given. So that's what we are focusing on. We're kind of focusing on the speeches that were not included in his other works. So I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to, for Facebook Live, I'm going to take a moment and invite some people in. And good morning to those of you who are coming in. Hope that you are having a great and wonderful day. That your day is going well. That the Lord is blessing the works of your hands. It is very cool and rainy and overcast here today. Nevertheless, work must be done. All right. So good morning. You can tap the likes or tap the hearts to let us know that you can hear clearly and that you are in the room, or you can greet us by saying good morning. So again, we are on The Radical King. We should be finishing this up probably by next week, the sections that we're going to be reading through, and then we're going to move on to another book, another topic. So I hope that you will continue to join us for these read alouds. And today we're focused on nonviolence and social change. Nonviolence and social change. In 1967, Dr. King delivered 5 lectures for the renowned Massey Lecture Series of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. Prior to King's assassination, the lectures were published as a book under the title Conscience for Change, and they were republished in 1968 as The Trumpet of Conscience. Each oration features a distinct theme related to the African American civil rights struggle, revealing some of King's most introspective and last impressions of the civil rights movement. So that's where we are. Let's get right into the reading for today. There's nothing wrong with a traffic law which says you have to stop for a red light. But when a fire is raging, the fire truck goes right through that red light, and normal traffic had better get out of its way. Or when a man is bleeding to death, the ambulance goes through those red lights at top speed. There's a fire raging now for the Negroes and the poor of this society. Now, one thing I will say about this speech when I read it is it literally felt like I was reading MLK's thoughts on Charlotte and the protests that are happening now. So it was very eerie listening to him talk about nonviolence and social change, and literally superimposing his words on top of what is happening right now, literally in Charlotte. So listen in. There's a fire raging now for the Negroes and the poor of this society. They are living in tragic conditions because of the terrible economic injustices that keep them locked in as an underclass, as the sociologists are now calling it. Disinherited people all over the world are bleeding to death from deep social and economic wounds. They need brigades of ambulance drivers who will have to ignore the red lights of the present system until the emergency is solved. Now, just yesterday, an article came out concerning the UN demanding the United States give Black America reparations. I had some people I saw were commenting on it, and they were basically saying that Black America doesn't need any more handouts, or Black America doesn't need any government assistance. What I will say to that is, that's not government assistance. That's what's owed to Black America. Just like when they gave reparations to the Native Americans for the many of them they killed and slaughtered and the many stolen lands, just like they gave reparations to the Japanese who were interned in camps unjustly, imprisoned in camps unjustly. They gave reparations to the Japanese ancestors, just like they gave to the Jewish ancestors who are in the United States, and the Holocaust didn't happen here. Okay? So let's be clear. That's not welfare. That's not government assistance. That's what's due to the ancestors of Black Americans. So if you see someone using that term government assistance in regards to reparations, please remind them of the many people that the United States has given reparations to already. They're just refusing to do that in regards to Black America. All right, so we're going to move on. Massive civil disobedience is a strategy for social change which is at least as forceful as an ambulance with its siren on full. In the past 10 years, nonviolent civil disobedience has made a great deal of history, especially in the southern United States. Good morning to all coming in. When we in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference went to Birmingham, Alabama in 1963, we had decided to take action on the matter of integrated public accommodations. We went knowing that the Civil Rights Commission had written powerful documents calling for change, calling for the very rights we were demanding. Listen to what he says. They had written documents calling for change. They were calling, they were demanding for their rights to be acknowledged. He says here, but nobody did anything about the commission's report. Nothing was done until we acted on these very issues and demonstrated before the court of world opinion the urgent need for change. So when people keep saying, I don't understand why they're protesting, what good is it going to do? It's putting the issues that have been unaddressed in Black America in regards to injustice, is putting it on the world court. That's what it's doing. Because as long as we can hide as a country, right? As long as we can hide as a country and not really address what's happening, as long as it doesn't get on the world news and we have to actually address it from a world is looking at a standpoint, many times the things that are happening will be ignored. So we don't need it to be ignored. It was the same story with voting rights. The Civil Rights Commission, 3 years before it went to Selma, had recommended the changes we started marching for, but nothing was done until in 1965, we created a crisis the nation couldn't ignore. Without violence, we totally disrupted the system, the lifestyle of Birmingham, and then of Selma. with their unjust and unconstitutional laws. Our Birmingham struggle came to its dramatic climax when some 3,500 demonstrators virtually filled every jail in that city and surrounding communities, and some 4,000 more continued to march and demonstrate nonviolently. The city knew then, in terms that were crystal clear, that Birmingham could no longer continue to function until the demands of the Negro community were met. The same kind of dramatic crisis was created in Selma 2 years later. The result on the national scene was the Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Rights Act. As President and Congress responded to the drama and the creative tension generated by the carefully planned demonstrations. Of course, by now it is obvious that new laws are not enough. The emergency we now face is economic, and it is a desperate and worsening situation. For the 35 million poor in America, not even to mention just yet the poor in other nations, there's a kind of strangulation in the air. In our society, it is murder psychologically to deprive a man of a job or an income. Listen, that's a very powerful point. So think on it for a moment. It is murder psychologically to deprive a man of a job or an income. So you're either killing them psychologically, and when a person feels, as he's going to talk about later, as a person feels like they're being killed psychologically or slowly, then they begin to lose reasons for living. I'm going to keep reading. You are in substance saying to that man that he has no right to exist. You are in a real way depriving him of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, denying in his case the very creed of his society. Now, millions of people are being strangled that way. The problem is international in scope, and it is getting worse as the gap between the poor and the affluent society increases. The question that now divides the people who want radically to change that situation is, can a program of nonviolence, even if it envisions massive civil disobedience, realistically expect to deal with such an enormous entrenched evil? First of all, will nonviolence work psychologically after the summer of 1967? Many people feel that nonviolence as a strategy for social change was cremated in the flames of the urban riots of the last 2 years. They tell us that Negroes have only now begun to find their true manhood in violence, that the riots prove not only that Negroes hate whites, but that compulsively they must destroy them. It seems like the same exact rhetoric, right, is being used today, that Black people are violent, that all Black people hate white people. This is stuff that's being said on the news in 2016, right? And that compulsively, if Black people hate white people, then they must be out to destroy them, right? This bloodlust interpretation ignores one of the most striking features of the city riots. Violent they certainly were, but the violence, to a startling degree, was focused against property rather than against people. There were very few cases of injury to persons, and the vast majority of the rioters were not involved at all in attacking people. The much publicized death toll that marked the riots and the many injuries were overwhelmingly inflicted on the rioters by the military. Why do I feel like I'm reading Charlotte 2016? Yeah. It is clear that the riots were exacerbated by police action that was designed to injure or even to kill the people. As for the snipers, no account of the riots claimed that more than 1 or 2 dozen people were involved in sniping. From the facts, an unmistakable pattern emerges. A handful of Negroes used gunfire substantially to intimidate, not to kill, and all the other participants had a different target, which was property. I am aware that there are many who wince at the distinction between property and persons and hold both sacrosanct. My views are not so rigid. A life is sacred. Property is intended to serve life, no matter how much we surround it with rights and respect. It has no personal being. It is part of the earth man walks on. It is not man. The focus on property in the 1967 riots is not accidental. It has a message. It is saying something. If hostility to whites were ever going to dominate Black people's attitude and reach murderous proportions, surely it would be during a riot. But this rare opportunity was sublimated into arson or turned into a kind of stormy carnival of free merchandise distribution. Why did the rioters avoid personal attacks? The explanation cannot be fear of retribution, because the physical risks incurred at the attacks on property were no less than for personal assaults. The military forces were treating acts of petty larceny as equal to murder. Far more rioters took chances with their own lives in their attacks on property than threatened the life of anyone else. So what MLK is making a case for here is he's saying if Black people were really these murderous beasts that people are trying to make them out to be, then in a riot there would have been murder of white people. There would have been murder of other people who were out there. So he's making the case that even though the media keeps trying to paint them as these dangerous, criminal people, he's saying that Black people are really not out to murder an entire group of people, because they could have done that at a riot. That would have been the opportune time if they were really in their minds trying to murder another people group. I think that's very important to note. So he was basically saying they were taking out their anger on property, not on personal life. Why were they so violent with property then? Because property represents white power structures, and they were attacking and trying to destroy it. A curious proof of the symbolic aspect of the looting for some who took part in it is the fact that after the riots, police received hundreds of calls from Black people trying to return merchandise they had taken. Now he's talking about the 1967 riots. Those people wanted the experience of redressing the power imbalance that property represents. Possession afterward was secondary. A deeper level of hostility came out in arson, which was far more dangerous than the looting. But it too was a demonstration and a warning. It was directed against symbols of exploitation, and it was designed to express the depth of anger in the community. What does this restraint in the summer riots mean for our future strategy? If one can find a core of nonviolence toward persons, even during the riots when emotions are exploding, it means that nonviolence should not be written off for the future as a force in Black life. Let me restart. We'll come back on Facebook Live with part 2. All right, we are back again with part 2. Hopefully, Those who are in will be able to come back in with us. On will be able to come back in with us. Let's see if this is working better. All right. All right. Is everything clear now? Because on my end, the video kept going. You can either tap the thumbs up if you can hear and see clearly, or tap some hearts so I can know that you are in the room. Thumbs up or hearts? Thumbs up or hearts so I can know that you're there. All right, I'm going to keep going. This is part 2. And what I just covered is that MLK was talking about the fact that rioters, right? And please tap the thumbs up so I know that the connection is okay and everybody's able to hear. He was talking about the fact that with rioters, they weren't really after personally attacking people. And what that showed is that nonviolence as a method should not be written off for the future as a force in Negro life. Many people believe that the urban Negro is either too angry and too sophisticated to be nonviolent. Those same people dismiss the nonviolent marches in the South and try to describe them as processions of pious elderly ladies. The fact is that in all the marches we have organized, some men of very violent tendencies have been involved. It was routine for us to collect hundreds of knives from our own ranks before the demonstrations in cases of momentary weakness. And in Chicago last year, we saw some of the most violent individuals accepting nonviolent discipline. Day after day during those Chicago marches, I walked in our lines and I never saw anyone retaliate with violence. There were lots of provocations, not only the screaming white hoodlums lining the sidewalks, but also groups of Negro militants talking about guerrilla warfare. We had some gang leaders and members marching with us. I remember walking in the Blackstone Rangers while bottles were flying from the sidelines. And I saw their noses being broken, blood flowing from their wounds, and I saw them continue and not retaliate, not one of them with violence. I am convinced that even very violent temperaments can be channeled through non-violent discipline. If the movement is moving, if they can act constructively and express through an effective channel their very legitimate anger. But even if nonviolence can be valid psychologically for the protesters who want change, it is going to be effective strategically against a government and a status quo that have so far resisted demands on the ground that we must not reward the rioters. Far from rewarding the rioters, far from even giving a hearing to their just and urgent demands, the administration has ignored its responsibility for the causes of the riots and instead has used the negative aspects of them to justify continued inaction on the underlying issues. And again, this is something that is happening in 2016, right? This is something that is happening in 2016. The administration has ignored its responsibilities for the causes of riots and instead has used the negative aspects of them to justify continued inaction on the underlying issues. The administration's only concrete response was to initiate a study and call for a day of prayer. As a minister, I take prayer too seriously to use it as an excuse for avoiding work and responsibility. When a government commands more wealth and power than has ever been known in the history of the world and offers no more than this, it is worse than blind. It is provocative. It is paradoxical but fair to say that Negro terrorism is incited less on ghetto street corners than in the halls of Congress. So if you are still here live with us, please tap the screen so that I can know that we are still live with our broadcast. You're still live with us. Go ahead and tap the screen so that I can make sure that I am connecting with you all and you are able to hear me. All right. We're going to try this one more time. We're going to go on to part 3 because we are almost done today. And thank you for those of you who are with us on YouTube, who are bearing with us in our technical difficulties. All right. So let's see if this will be helpful for. All right, we are back again. We are back again. Let's see, part 3 as we continue to read and close out. See if we can get it to stay on today. It is kind of rainy and windy here, so that may have some effect on our ability to keep our wireless going. If you can hear and see clearly, please tap the hearts. If you can see and hear clearly, press the like or tap the hearts, either one. If you can see or hear clearly, please tap the hearts or the like so I can continue. Good morning, Roosevelt. So again, we are in part 3. We're reading from The Radical King, a section out of The Radical King, and we're talking about nonviolence and social change is our topic. And we are now on the section where MLK is talking about something that's happening right now in terms of rioting and protests. And he's saying that the administration has ignored its responsibility for the causes of riots and instead has used negative aspects of riots to justify continued inaction on the underlying issues. In other words, rather than respond to justice or rather than respond to demands, oh man, oh, okay, well, I'm hoping that it stays this time. Rather than give in to these demands, they're basically saying that the government continues to justify their inaction by saying, well, you guys are being rowdy in demanding justice, so we don't have to respond. That's basically what's going on and what happened in MLK's day. They continue to use this excuse of we can't reward the disruption, but they never addressed the issues of injustice. So that's still a tactic that is still used today by our government to say, well, you guys are being disruptive, so we're not going to answer you. They're not dealing with the fact of why they're being disruptive. They're just only using rioting, right, as a way, or protesting really as a way to say, well, since you guys are protesting, we're not going to answer you, we're not going to respond. All right. I intended to show that nonviolence will be effective, but not until it has achieved the massive dimensions, the disciplined planning, and the intense commitment of a sustained direct action movement of civil disobedience on the national scale. The dispossessed of this nation, the poor, both white and Negro, live in a cruelly unjust society. They must organize a revolution against that injustice, not against the lives of the persons who are their fellow citizens, but against the structures through which the society is refusing to take means which have been called for and which are at hand to lift the load of poverty. The only real revolutionary, people say, is a man who has nothing to lose. There are millions of poor people in this country who have very little or even nothing to lose. Now, MLK is about to go into his plan for his last march on Washington, which never took place because they assassinated him. I had to tell somebody yesterday, they were giving me the whole, if you're polite speech, then you'll get things done, or if you're polite, then nothing will happen to you. And I had to say, well, it wasn't politeness that killed MLK. It wasn't manners that killed MLK. It wasn't his moral values that killed him. He was assassinated. So please stop telling people if you're just polite and comply and do what people ask you to do, nothing will happen to you, because that's not true. Okay? MLK was not assassinated because of his impoliteness. He was assassinated because he was speaking truth to power, and he was trying to get justice for the poor and for Black people. And people didn't want that. Okay? So let's be clear. And as we read this section, you will kind of get an idea why they were determined to stop him from getting to Washington again to protest. Because now it wasn't just a civil rights issue, it was a human rights issue. It was the poor people's campaign that he was beginning to push. All right? So listen to his words and listen carefully. There are millions of poor people in this country who have very little, even nothing to lose. If they can be helped to take action together, they will do so with a freedom and a power that will be a new and unsettling force in our complacent national life. Beginning in the new year, we will be recruiting 3,000 of the poorest citizens from 10 different urban and rural areas to initiate and lead a sustained, massive, direct action movement in Washington. Those who choose to join this initial 3,000, this nonviolent army, this freedom church of the poor, will work with us for 3 months to develop nonviolent action skills. Then we will move on to Washington, determined to stay there until the legislative and executive branches of the government take serious and adequate action on jobs and income. A delegation of poor people can walk into a high official's office with a carefully collectively prepared list of demands. If you're poor, you're unemployed anyway, you can choose to stay in Washington as long as the struggle needs you. And if that official says, but Congress would have to approve this, or, but the president would have to be consulted on that, you can say, all right, we'll wait. And you can settle down in his office for as long a stay as necessary. If you are, let's say, from rural Mississippi and have never had medical attention, and your children are undernourished and unhealthy, you can take those little children into the Washington hospitals and stay with them there until the medical workers cope with their needs. And in showing it your children, you will have shown this country a sight that will make it stop in its busy tracks and think hard about what it has done. The many people who will come and join this 3,000 from all groups in the country's life will play a supportive role, deciding to be poor for a time, along with the dispossessed who are asking for their right to jobs or income, the demolition of slums, and the rebuilding by the people who live there of new communities in their place. In fact, a new economic deal for the poor. Listen, this is why MLK had to go. Because he was in essence saying, I'm going to put your issue, I'm going to put this country's issue in your face. So you cannot ignore it. You cannot deny it. And because these people have no jobs, they can camp out as long as they need to. Brilliant strategy. Except they basically said, oh no, we're not having this. We're not having our capital being overrun by the poor. So we're going to nip this in the bud. That's what happened. Why camp in Washington to demand these things? Because only the federal Congress and administration can decide to use the billions of dollars we need for a real war on poverty. We need a new law. We need not a new law, but a massive new national program. This Congress has done nothing to help such measures and plenty to hinder them. Why should Congress care about our dying cities? It is still dominated by senior representatives of the rural South who still unite in an obstructive coalition with unprogressive Northerners to prevent public funds from going where they are socially needed. We broke that coalition in 1963 and 1964 when the civil rights and voting rights laws were passed. We need to break it again by the size and force of our movement, and the best place to do that is before the eyes and inside the buildings of these same congressmen. The people of this country, if not the congressmen, are ready for a serious economic attack on slums and unemployment, as two recent polls by Lou Harris have revealed. So we have to make Congress ready to act on the plight of the poor. We will prod and sensitize the legislators, the administrators, and all the wielders of power until they have faced this utterly imperative need. I've said that the crisis we face is international in scope. Can a nonviolent direct action movement find application on the international level to confront economic and political problems? I believe it can. It is clear to me that the next stage of the movement is to become international. National movements within the developed countries, forces that focus on London, Paris, Washington, or Ottawa, must help to make it politically feasible for their governments to undertake the kind of massive aid that the developing countries need if they are to break the chains of poverty. We in the West must bear in mind that the poor countries are poor primarily because we have exploited them through political or economic colonialism. Oh, thank you for viewing though. Americans in particular must help their nation repent of her modern economic imperialism. There goes that word again that people don't like to hear. Repent, repent, repent. But movements in our countries alone will not be enough. In Latin America, for example, national reform movements have almost despaired of nonviolent methods. Many young men, even many priests, have joined guerrilla movements in the hills. So many of Latin America's problems have roots in the United States of America that we need to form a solid, united movement, nonviolently conceived and carried through, so that pressure can be brought to bear on the capital and government power structures concerned from both sides of the problem at once. I think that may be the only hope for a nonviolent solution in Latin America today. Even entrenched problems like the South African government and its racial policies can be tackled on this level. If just two countries, Britain and the United States, could be persuaded to end all economic interaction with the South African regime, they could bring that government to its knees in a relatively short time. Theoretically, the British and American governments could make that kind of decision. Almost every corporation in both countries has economic ties with this government, which it could not afford to do without. Although it is obvious that nonviolent movements for social change must internationalize because of the interlocking nature of the problems they all face, and because otherwise those problems will breed war, we have hardly begun to build the skills and the strategy or even the commitment to planetize our movement for social justice. In a world facing the revolt of ragged and hungry masses of God's children, in a world torn between tensions of East and West, white and black, individualist and collectivist, in a world whose cultural and spiritual power lags so far behind her technological capabilities that we live each day on the verge of nuclear co-annihilation. And this nonviolence is no longer an option for intellectual analysis. It is an imperative for action. Now, I don't know why we have been taping nonstop through our YouTube channel. So if you'd like to watch the entire video from start to finish without any breaks, you can check it out on our YouTube channel, which is Church Love 333 on YouTube. I don't know why Facebook was breaking up several times over the topic of what? Non-violence and social change. MLK was saying even in his day, and we see it even more in our own day, that non-violence for social change is not simply a suggestion, but as he said, it's an imperative. Because in MLK's words again, he said it really is the difference between existing and annihilation. And if you think about that, it almost goes back to what he said about love. Love or perish. Love or die. Seek to have change in your community and in your society through nonviolence, or it's going to lead to war. And what? War does not ever end. Any of us living in the last 20 to 30 years realize that we have been in wars with somebody nonstop, it seems like, especially since 9/11. So he was basically saying that war is not the answer. You're either going to learn how to live together, or you're going to get to the point where you leave humanity in a state of annihilation. So I would hope and I would pray that people who are especially on the front lines of, fighting for injustice, I would hope that we would understand this. Because sometimes we like to gloss over MLK and his dream, but he was really teaching here that even if he leaves the scene, the reality is, yeah, it's love or hate. The reality is you cannot keep, excuse me, you cannot keep going in the direction of war indefinitely without everybody, as the saying says, if you keep going this route, everybody's going to be missing an eyeball, everybody's going to be missing an arm, everybody's going to be missing a leg, because war and hostility just continues to breed more war and hostility. So that was what I got out of what he was saying in this particular section, is that nonviolence can work. People destroying property, even though that's bad, is not as bad as people destroying each other. And he was saying, even with the riots, you know, and people responding, as he said before, that riots are the language of the unheard. Even with people responding in a riot, what he's pointing out is they're not destroying people, they're destroying property. And as long as they're not destroying people, there is hope for them to utilize nonviolent methods. Because if the goal is not to destroy people, then that means they still have a sense of humanity about them, and they can be trained and they can be developed in using methods of nonviolence to accomplish their goal. So I hope that you got something out of today's reading. Tomorrow, we are going to be covering, where are we? We have already covered that. Tomorrow, we are going to move into the section, I believe it is section 4, called Overcoming the Tyranny of Poverty and Hatred. Overcoming the Tyranny of Poverty and Hatred. So that is where we are going next. Overcoming the Tyranny of Poverty and Hatred. I hope that you have gotten something out of today's reading. Please go back. If you are only taking in this part 3, please go back and view parts 1 and 2. Or like I said, you can view it on our YouTube channel under the playlist MLK Uncut. And our YouTube channel is Church Love 333. You can also follow these previous teachings and readings out of this book. Follow the hashtag on Facebook Live on Facebook. In the search engine, all you have to do is type in hashtag The Radical King. To follow our former teachings, you can type in the hashtag Chaos or Community, or the hashtag Why We Can't Wait. So, Lord willing, I will see you back here tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and hopefully with a non-stop broadcast. Take care. You all have a great and wonderful day. It is Thinking Thursday, and my shirt says, Think for Yourself. So, take care. God bless. Catch the next broadcast, and please go back and review the broadcast from today, parts 1, 2, and 3. Take care, and God bless. Thank you again, my YouTube channel viewers. You guys are always awesome, and you guys are always on it. And I would like to thank YouTube for not cutting off. Take care, and God bless.